subjects concerning My Fair Lady and other musicals, including Hello Dolly as well. So first, what is nostalgia and how it is used in musical theatre? Uh, the word itself into the British language in the 17th century, but its origin is from ancient Greek. It combines two Greek words, nostos, which means return home, like what Odysseus was doing in the Odyssey. He was doing a nostos, he was doing a return home. And argos, which means longing. So this is basically speaking longing for home, but of course it can be used in a more metaphorical sense, meaning longing for the past, longing for one's youth, one's childhood, but also the good old times, the world as it was in the previous generations. And as you have observed, hopefully already, when we talked about the history of the musical, many musicals from the very beginning, from the Showboat, are set in previous generations, sometimes quite far in the past, like, I don't know, even in ancient times, if you think of, I don't know, the funny thing happened on the way to the forum, but very often just one or two generations earlier, so the times that could be remembered by, let's say, the grandparents or parents of the people in the audience. Why is it so widespread, and especially in the 50s and the 60s, so this golden age of Broadway, when the assumed target audience of the musical were the middle-aged, middle-class people with relatively high income. Nostalgia is a very popular theme. There are two types of nostalgia, and a scholar called Svetlana Boym, in her book The Future of Nostalgia, identifies two versions, two types of nostalgia, which she calls reflective and restorative. So reflective nostalgia is basically escapist. It's believing that the past was good, and believing that remembering the good old times is pleasant, and it allows people in the audience to escape from the daily troubles. So a common belief, especially towards the 19th century, that people had better manners, people had nicer clothes, and it was all simpler. The society was simpler, and it was less technologically heavy, but at the same time it was less atomized than the society today. So it's nice to look back in time and to remember or imagine the times when the life was easier. Of course, if you know anything about the history of the 19th century, it wasn't. It was much harder, especially for the people like the Doolittles. So the working class people living in London, trying to make a living, not being rich, so forced to work. It was hard physical labor. It was very often problems like even starvation. We'll return to this when we talk about Oliver. But of course, in the world of the musical, it's always, not always, but in My Fair Lady definitely, it is made into a stuff of comedy. We'll return to the subject of comedy in a little while when we talk about Hello Dolly. But let's now move to the second type of nostalgia, the restorative nostalgia. And according to Svetlana Boym, this is a more dangerous type of nostalgia, because this is not only the belief that the past was better, but a belief that the past should be restored, so that nowadays, we should try to live like the people in the past because they were so much better. This is not really the kind of nostalgia that Broadway was looking for in My Fair Lady or Hello Dolly, but bear that in mind because some of the darker shows may actually make use of the restorative rather than the reflective nostalgia. Another question which is quite interesting, especially in reference to My Fair Lady, is the so-called American interest. Remember when we talked about the conventions of the musical theatre, especially during the golden age of Broadway, it was believed that musicals, successful musicals, should have what was called American interest. So they should have some elements that would be particularly interesting for the American audience. This was the prime example of this is Oklahoma, but of course My Fair Lady is not set in America, it's set in England, in London, and because of that, this was again not a sure hit. And some investors whom Lerner and Lair contacted with their idea for a new show were quite hesitant to invest their money in a show which was not visibly American. But if you think about it, there is a lot of American interest in My Fair Lady, even though it is not set in America, because it deals with some of the great American themes. The Cinderella story is quite similar to the American dream. So the kind of rags to riches story that allows a poor person to advance in the world through their own effort, through a little bit of luck, as one of the songs from the musical says, and through hard work and learning. So anyone in this world can achieve a status of a gentleman or a lady. So what we have is a very egalitarian view of the society, quite different in fact to what Victorian and Edwardian society was really like, with very strong class distinctions. So this egalitarianism has been observed as one of the reasons why My Fair Lady really achieved such great success. It was even called a perfect musical by some theatre critics. It had a lot of revivals and it has never been forgotten. So it's still very high on the list of the best musicals ever, and it's entertaining and lovely and according, especially to American critics, still perceived as one of the best musicals of the century. And I believe that this egalitarianism, which was so close to the American perception of the world and society, is one of the reasons why it happened.